Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, which is about permissions management in MemoQ. I'm Gabor Ugray, I'm Head of Development at Kilgray. I'm going to be presenting this webinar to you today. Before I actually begin, please type in the questions box to let me know if the audio is alright or if I need to adjust any of the settings here on my end. If I do need to adjust settings, I'm just going to do that now. So I have 3 OKs and greats for now. That's excellent. Thank you very much. So without much ado, actually, I'm just going to launch straight into permissions management in MemoQ. I'm not even going to ask any poll questions whether or not you use MemoQ. I assume that most of you here in the audience, or practically all of you, are actually using MemoQ and using the MemoQ server. This is a funny topic to present, and also in a way a funny topic to create in MemoQ, because after all, we are developing a translation tool with MemoQ. We love to focus on features and functionality that is related to translation, how to provide the optimal environment for translators and project managers. And permissions, as soon as you have a server that you're working with, are a necessary thing and you have to think about it, but it's definitely not the first thing that comes to your mind when you talk about translation. It's an IT thing. Nevertheless, as soon as you share your agency's or your company's content, this is a very crucial issue. So that's probably the reason why all of you are here in this webinar. However, this will be slightly IT-ish. That is in the nature of things. So first thing to look at when we are talking about permissions are users, because obviously what you want to control is how different users can access and see the resources in your MemoQ server. So to take a first look at users in MemoQ server, let me just log into this test server. I'm using the server administrator now, and let's take a look at these two categories here. The first and obvious one is user management. This is the list where you can define the users in your MemoQ server. After installation, your MemoQ server comes with a single user that is admin, full name administrator. I believe that is localized. And this is a user you will never get rid of. This single user is always there. All the other users are manually defined in the server. So these are the usernames with a password in the background that have access to your MemoQ server or to the web-based systems that build upon MemoQ server. You can do the usual things, create a new user, edit an existing one. I'm going to click on edit. It brings up the same dialog. You can have a username, a password, full name, and some additional information. This is pretty straightforward. Now, MemoQ server does not only know about users, it also knows about groups. So you can make your users part of 1 or more, or even 0 or more groups. After you install MemoQ server, it comes with a number of built-in groups. Those will always be there. So there you have administrators. This allows you to define another user, make that user part of administrators, and then that user will have the same privileges as the built-in admin. Everyone is just a big umbrella. It's an implicit group. All users defined in the MemoQ server belong to everyone. Then another built-in group is project managers. We have publishers, Q-term external users, terminologists, and translators. These are the built-in groups that are always there. Now we have another group here, which is named task group. Very adequate name. I don't know who created that. That's a user-defined group. You can also enable and disable groups. If you go into edit, here's this checkbox, disabled. Because this one is tagged, that's why you see this X here. If a group is disabled, then as far as permissions management is concerned, it's just as if it weren't there. Similarly, you can also disable individual users. You can go into edit and click login disabled. And if you disable a user, That means that username and password will never be accepted as long as the user is disabled by MemoQ server. All right. So this is the basic framework of defining users and defining groups. One thing I forgot to mention, how do you define which users belong to a specific group? Well, you can just go into Edit here, and you can list the users that are part of that group. You can add or remove users, or similarly, the other way around, you can also click on the properties of a user, click Edit, and define which groups that specific user is a member of. So it works both ways, but you're looking at the same thing only from two different angles. Okay, so this is all about users and groups. You will see in a moment my groups are a useful thing to have on top of users. Now let's look at actual permissions. There are a number of things in MemoQ that have to do with permissions. The most obvious one is resources. So I'm going to open the resource console. This lists all the resources that are recognized by MemoQ. Right now I'm looking at translation memories, and because I have this server selected at the top of the list contains resources that are published on this server, and the bottom of the list always shows my local resources. Permissions only make sense if you are talking about resources on a server. More than that, it only makes sense if you are talking about resources on a server that are actually published. All of the resources that you see here are actually published. There's this little hand icon holding a book. If you tick it, then the resource is unpublished, and unless you have special privileges, that means you're an administrator or a project manager, you will not even get to see it, and you'll not be able to publish it again. So let's take a look at the permissions defined for a specific translation memory. The command to look at this is set permissions. It's also there among the links. Oops, this is the wrong one. Maybe this one will work. These are actually only resources that were memorized by my MemoQ client from a previous time, and in the meantime the actual translation memory has been deleted from the server. Okay, I'm just going to create a new one. I'm calling it demo TM. I'm making it an English to German TM. And I've got an error. Okay, that is the problem if you're using a development server and a development build of MemoQ to demonstrate things in a webinar. Sorry about that. I'm going to switch to another server. Let me take a look at MemoQTM.com. I hope I will not get into troubles when I'm demoing projects. So let's take a look at the permissions for this translation memory here. What you see here is a list of permissions that belong to either a user or a group of users. So you can see administrators have explicit admin permission to this translation memory. For translation memories, you can define three kinds of permissions. It's either admin, update, or lookup. If a user has admin permission, then that user can do everything with a TM. They can delete it, they can unpublish it, they can export it, they can import into it, and they can change the permissions of other users. If they have update permission for a TM, that means they can add new entries, so they can use Control-Enter to store new stuff in the TM, and of course they will get lookup results. And the weakest permissions are lookup permissions, which simply allow users to see the TM and to add them to a project and perform lookup, but they are not able to add new stuff to the translation memory. So how do groups relate to users? If you're a specific user, you're always looking at a resource as a specific user. MemoQ looks at all the groups that you're a member of. It takes the group that you're a member of that has the strongest permission, and you definitely have that much privilege to the resource. Then it looks for your specific user, and it looks at the permission that is assigned to your user, which may even be stronger than one that you're getting through a group membership. And if it is stronger, then it takes that permission. These permissions are strictly ordered. So admin is strongest, then comes update, lookup is weakest, and weakest of all is no permission at all. So this way MemoQ figures out which is your strongest permission, either directly assigned to you or assigned to you through a group that you're a member of, and that is the permission that you have for that resource. In some systems, such as Windows, you can also define a different item in lists like this. These are the access permissions, and in some other systems you can define deny permissions. MemoQ does not have that. You can only give access, but you cannot specifically deny anything to a user. This is more simpler than a full-fledged permission system like you have in Windows for users and files. Okay, so what do you do with the permissions of this particular TM? You can change an existing permission, so I can make translators be able to only look up, and I can make terminologists be only able to update, and you can add the new one either to a group or to a specific user. One interesting thing to look at here is expiry. Permissions can have an expiry. If this box is not ticked, then the permission will always be there until you manually delete it. If the permission does have an expiry, then the permission will only be valid until that date and time that is specified here. Okay, so this is how you change the permissions of a translation memory. Very similar thing goes for term bases, live docs, and all the other resources. The specific kinds of permissions that you can assign to a resource depends on the time of the resource. So for translation memories, we saw lookup, update, and admin. For term bases, there are slightly more than that. You can define lookup, update, review, and admin. The two make a difference if you're using moderated term bases. Otherwise, review is the same as update for a regular term base in MemoQ. Again, permissions work out in a very similar way. Lookup speaks for itself. Update also allows you to add new entries, and admin allows you to bulk add new entries, import, export, delete, unpublish, and change permissions for others. One thing I did not mention so far is that if you're admin, or if you're another user that is the member of administrators, then you can do anything, regardless of specific permissions. So admin takes all. If you're an admin, then you can do everything, always. That's a very important thing to know. All right. We can take a look at the permissions for live docs. Nope, not here. I'm sorry about that. Maybe I can create a new one and then it will work. I'm just going to create demo corpus online. Okay, I don't have enough rights to do that. What is my current login to MemoQTM.com? I have a very weak login here. This user is only member of translators. So what I did is I clicked on Manage Logins in the top right corner of this dialog, which brings up all the logins that MemoQ has stored for me for various servers. And I can delete a stored item. And when MemoQ next needs to talk to this server, when I click Select here, it will prompt me for a login. So let me log in as admin now. Already I see a lot more resources here. And if I click Set Permissions, I can take a look at the kind of permissions that you can define for a live docs corpus, because that is a more structured kind of animal. So to say, you have even more permissions here. You have lookup and mass lookup. Mass lookup is something you need in the case of a corpus to perform analysis and to perform pre-translation. For the translation memory, this is not taken separately, but for LiveDocs corpora, we made a distinction here. View allows you even more. It allows you to open a document in a LiveDocs corpus in its entirety. With lookup, you only get lookup results. With view, you can view the entire document. Edit allows you to even edit documents. Approve allows you to change the status of individual rows in corpus documents to the double check marked one, the proofread one. And again, admin allows also bulk operations, deleting the corpus, etc. Okay, I promise you I will stop in just a moment, but let me take a look at yet another kind of resource, which is a light resource. All the other light resources work in a very similar fashion. Let's take a look at this one. If I click Set Permissions here, let me add a new permission for this one. I'm going to add permission to this user. The kind of permissions you can define for a light resource are use, change, and admin. So that pretty much corresponds to lookup, update, and admin in the case of a translation memory, but you don't specifically do lookup with a light resource. So we call the same thing differently. We call them use, change, and admin. So I'm giving admin permission to the user, UG, to this resource. Okay. Let me show you, in the case of a translation memory, how lookup permissions work and what the user experiences if a permission is revoked. I am going to just pick an English to German translation memory here. Let's make it, I actually don't want to mess up anybody's work, so I'm just going to create a new one. So I'm calling a test English to German translation memory. That's it. And let's take a look at the permissions that this item now has. When you create a new translation memory or a new resource, MemoQ also automatically adds this list of default permissions to that resource. You can always remove this later, but when you create a new one, this default list is added. Admin is always there. With full permissions, administrators do, then come project managers, terminologists, and translators by default have update permission. If you want a more fine-tuned system of permissions in your server, then when you create a new resource, then take care to remove the default permissions that are automatically added. Okay, so these translators now have update permission. That looks pretty good to me. And let me now go back to this user that you saw just a moment ago. So I'm going back to Server Administrator, User Management, and let's take a look at this translator. This user should be a member of a single group, and I'm going to do that now, translators. So through her membership in the translators group, this user now has update permission to my newly created translation memory. Okay, I'm going to go into a German to English project. Go to translation memories. Let's make MemoQ forget my previous login, which is admin. I'm sorry about this. I'm going to be doing this quite a lot because I have no other choice, because I only have a single computer. This way I can force MemoQ to log me in again with a different username. So there's my test English to German translation memory. And if I go into translations, let me just open a file at random. I'm just going to type something dummy here, press Ctrl Enter, and it's been stored in the online TM. Okay? Now I'm going to log in as admin. And I'm going to remove this user's group membership. So she's no longer a member of translators, which means she's no longer going to get any sort of permissions for this particular translation memory. If I press F3 for lookup, you can see this lookup error appears in the status bar and it says access denied. If I try to confirm this segment again, I get a message, failed to add entry to the translation memory, access denied. So even though the user still has this translation memory marked as part of the project, she can no longer actually access it. And if I try to add it again, MemoQ will recheck permissions and will not even allow me to add it to the project at this point. So this is how the lack of a specific permission appears in MemoQ. At this point, in the name of frankness, I need to point out something to you. If I click select again to refresh this list here, because this user now, TR Krista, is not a member of any group, she doesn't actually have permission for these translation memories. We definitely saw that she does not have any kind of permission for this translation memory right here. But the memory still appears in the list. It should not, and that's a bug, and we are going to be fixing that bug in our build that comes out in 3 weeks' time. So even the very visibility of a translation memory for which someone does not have a permission can often be a problem, and our users have called our attention to this, and we are changing that now. So that is just one thing to explain to you, because I know that this question was going to come up in the webinar anyway. Okay, so now we got the first layer of permissions in MemoQ right. That is permissions directly assigned to a resource that is published by the server. Here's where the story starts to begin to be exciting, because there's another layer on top of that, which comes through membership in online projects. So let me now. Okay, I have a question from Carlin here, and this is probably relevant. Just to want to get a clarification, we have to set individual permissions to every translator per TM, right? No, actually you don't. When you create a TM, by default, that translation memory, as we saw it in the resource console, let me just delete this item, go back to the resource console as admin so I can show you all of this. When I created this translation memory, which one was it? Test English to German. MemoQ automatically added this bunch of permissions here. And as you can see, translators automatically get update permission. Normally, the users that you define in your MemoQ server will be part of a group. And normally, if you define a user that's going to be used for translation, you want to add that to the translators group. So that way, everybody that's a translator automatically gets access to all the resources that have a permission for translators. And by default, resources do have a permission for translators. What we were aiming at here is quite permissive, was to make sure that permissions management with the default settings does not get in your way of doing things. If you want to be more restrictive, then you can take away from the defaults. But in order to get up and running and start working, you don't have to explicitly define stuff. That is the rule that we were following. Okay, so let me now take a look at online projects. Now in this version of the tool, let me see if that works at memoqtm.com. I'm going to look at demo webinar. I just want to open up an online project so you have it in front of you. you can see that in online projects you can also add translation memories, term bases, and maybe even other kinds of resources, definitely live docs corpora, to a project. Now, if you have a user that is part of your project, that means that user is listed here in users. This user right here that I was showing you is actually listed here. Then that user is entitled to a number of things. First of all, that user can check out the online project. So when you click check out online project, then you get to see those projects here in which you have a role. You're either a project manager or just a regular user. Once you check out the project, in order to actually do translation or review in that project, you're going to open that checked out local copy. That's what users do. Now, for as long as you're actually working in the local copy of an online project, some extra permissions also apply just by the virtue of your being part of the project. So what are these extra permissions? For translation memories, all users have an update permission for basically all the translation memories that you check here, not only the primary one. That is something we are changing in a very short time. You will only have lookup permission for all the TMs and update for only the primary one. Similarly, for term bases, this project currently doesn't have any, but I can add this one, for instance. All term bases that are part of the project, you have update permission for, and a similar kind of permission is added to live docs. So when you're actually working in the local copy of an online project, then MemoQ does not only check your users, so to say, global permissions, but also checks your role in the project and what kind of permissions are automatically granted to different resources, because those resources are ticked in the project. This allows you to set up a scheme, for instance, where you don't actually make users members of the translators group. So by default, a user can see nothing, can use nothing from your server. But you can still add these users to an online project. You set up the online project, and it would be really nasty if somebody checked out that project and then wouldn't be able to work for lack of permissions. That's why these project permissions are automatically granted. And then as long as the user is working in your online project, in the local copy of your online project, all the required permissions apply. But once the user switches to his or her own private project and wants to use a translation memory from your server, that is no longer possible. So this is the reason why we have these permissions that are granted through projects. This pretty much wraps it up as far as permissions management is controlled regarding resources in the MemoQ server. I'm just going to show you one more thing which is on a similar note but not exactly the same thing, and this has to do with translation memories and term bases only. So if I go into the properties of this translation memory right here, you can see that I don't only have this area with the list of permissions at the bottom, but there's a box at the top that says offline access. Allow users to check out offline copies and only online access. This is where you can tell whether or not you want to allow users to check out an offline copy of this translation memory. By default, again here, MemoQ server is permissive, so offline copies can be checked out. This is very useful if a user needs to work against a shaky internet connection or needs to spend some time working offline. Then all the data is there on her computer. Every once in a while she can synchronize its contents and then it goes to your server. In some other cases you may not want to allow any data to be downloaded even in this form to a user's machine, and then you tick only online access, and that way you can choose it. because this offline copy functionality is only available for translation memories and term bases, these are the two kinds of resources where you have the options at the top to allow or disallow offline access. For any other kind of resource, live docs or any light resources, you do not have the offline access option at the top. Okay, so this is not strictly speaking permissions management. This is just a setting, a property of every term base and translation memory that is published in your server, but nonetheless, it is useful to know about this. Now, after this, I'm going to move on to some slightly different topics. One of the topics is going to be how mobile licenses, ELM licenses, and permissions are interrelated. And another one that I'm going to look at is how you can access our web-based interfaces such as QTerm and MemoQ web translation and how that is related to permissions. So before I move on, is there anything that I need to explain more clearly here? Any more detail that you would like me to go into? I will be looking at the questions panel right now. If there are no questions coming up, then I will just move on. I also saw another question previously from Caroline. How can you hide other project resources from new projects or different projects without unpublishing them one by one? I'm not sure I exactly understand what you mean by this question. Maybe if you want to elaborate, I'll come back to that at the end. Okay, so a question from Renato. Why is Natalia, this project, red? I believe the reason for that is because there are documents in this project with an expired deadline, but I'm not completely sure. I believe this redness means the deadline has expired, but I do need to double check that. Okay, so now let me take a look at permissions and mobile licenses. So I'm going to go into the server administrator again and go to ELM licenses. Here I have in this server a pool of 5 licenses for MemoQ Translator Pro and a pool of 12 licenses for MemoQ Project Manager. How can you give these mobile licenses to users? The simplest thing to do is to directly assign the license. So I can click Assign here, pick a user, set a deadline. For a license, you always need to set a deadline, and click OK. And now this license is assigned to that user. That user can claim it either from the activation dialog or through the activation wizard, and that's it. The user can also return it, and then it goes back to the pool, just as if I clicked Revoke here. End of story. There is a much more flexible way to deal with mobile licenses, though, and that has to do with permissions. You can assign a permission either to a user or a full group of users. I'm going to, because I'm admin now, I'm actually going to assign a permission to admin until next week. And that shows up as an item here. But my pool is still at its full size of 5 licenses. So now, what can this user do? They can go to the Help menu and start the activation wizard, update their licenses from an ELM server, make that MemoQTM.com, and let's take a look at the results in the activation window. Here's my Translator Pro license from MemoQTM.com. If I take a look at the management panel for ELM licenses, you can see that now the pool is down to 4. And if I untick only manual assignments, you can see that admin shows up here. And you can see also that instead of the previous one, now we have this green icon here, which means this user got this license because he or she has a permission. Now, why is this useful? because this allows you to use mobile licenses on a self-serve basis. Now, the user can go back to the Help menu, to the Activation window, and return the ELM license. Having done that, the license pool in the server, I'm not going to show you, I trust you can believe me, has gone back up to 5. And I can take an ELM license again. And there it is. Now the pool in the server is back down to 4. And I can return it, and I can do it for as long as the permission is there. So this is a very flexible way. If you can establish a protocol with your users to say, when I give you a job, take a license and be sure to return it at the end of the job, then you can reduce the manual management effort related to mobile licenses. If a user fails to return a license, you can of course also always go into the server admin and forcibly revoke it, so it goes back to your pool. Okay, but there is one more twist to that. If you go into an online project, you can see that this sample document is now assigned to this user, TR Krista. Let me add a slightly longer deadline, so it's going to be December 11 now. And let me also go into the overview panel, users, and make sure that this checkbox here for license is checked next to the name of that user. This creates a project-based permission for the mobile license, for a Translator Pro mobile license quite specifically. You can get an overview of these project-based permissions again in the server admin, ELM licenses, and project permissions. You can see a number of users listed here that have a project-based permission. And what MemoQ does here, it looks at all the different projects in which a document may be assigned to that user. It picks the latest deadline, adds 3 days to that, so that's why you can see that it's not December 11th but December the 14th, and that's as long as the permission lasts. As soon as you change the assignments, the deadlines, the value here will probably be updated. And this allows users to not have any kind of license in MemoQ, and when they click Checkout Online Project, this dialog comes up, and when they intend to click Select, MemoQ recognizes that, oops, this copy of MemoQ does not have a license to actually check out the project. Let's see if I have some license permission assigned to me in this server. And the activation wizard comes up, and the client tries to update their licenses to fetch any license that may be granted to me and may be available in the pool. And if that's possible, then it automatically grabs a license from the online pool. So this again further simplifies the management of ELM licenses, because now you don't even have to take care to manually define permissions to various users, which they can use at any time. But these permissions automatically come from membership in online projects. So this is what I wanted to tell you about permissions versus mobile licenses in online projects. And finally, let me get back to these two mysterious groups, as a matter of fact, in MemoQTM.com. The two mysterious groups that I want to look at are, first of all, QTerm external users and publishers, because these two haven't come up yet. MemoQ server has a web-based terminology interface, which is called QTerm. Some of you might be using it. I can show you what it looks like in front of MemoQTM.com. This is how you can log in. Let me log in using the admin login. And this allows you to get access to term bases in the MemoQ server that have been marked as QTerm term bases. However, you obviously need a MemoQ server login to access this interface, because this is just another front end for the very same MemoQ server. These QTerm bases are actually term bases in the MemoQ server. You can also use them in the desktop client as parts of regular MemoQ projects. So it's not a separate system. However, it is quite possible that an agency, a translation agency, wants to give access to their customers, to their end clients, to review some term bases through the online interface. But for this, you might not want to create a full MemoQ login, say as a translator or something like that, that would give the client access to a lot of the resources in your MemoQ server. So in that case, you can just set up a user and make that user part of no other group but QTerm external users. And what this allows this login to do is simply to access QTerm through the web-based interface, to get past the login screen. And once the user has logged into QTerm, then this list will show those term bases which additionally have a specific permission granted to that user or a group of that user. So QTerm external users allows you to give access to the QTerm web-based interface to end clients and at the same time not give those users access to anything else in your MemoQ server. And the other one, just to round things off, is this user group that is called publishers. In order to explain about publishers, let me go back to the resource console. And you can see that if you want to create an online, say, translation memory, you can either create a new one. For that, you need to be a member of the administrators or the project managers group. You can clone one. The same thing applies. You need to have strong enough permissions for the TM in question. Or you can pick a local resource and click Share on Server. In the menu, it's this one right here. Now, you are allowed to do this if you're either an administrator or a project manager, or you are a member of the publishers group. So this is how you can control who can publish their own resources on your server. I know this is not a very frequent scenario, but it's possible that maybe even just by mistake a user gets an idea to publish a lot of stuff on your server that you don't really want to be there. And you can control this using the publishers group. This was the last missing link in my explanation. So I have a question from Martin about ELM. Can I get a mobile license from one MemoQ server and work on projects from another MemoQ server? Yes, this is a question we occasionally get, and in fact it is true. You can. So as long as that mobile license is there in your list of licenses right here, from that point on, it's blind to what you are doing with MemoQ. It allows MemoQ to run in the Translator Pro edition, and you can do anything you can do in the Translator Pro edition, no matter what that is. And so an explanation from Caroline about the previous question. How can I hide specific TMs from translators so they don't accidentally check and use TMs that is not part of their project? So what you can do is, in fact, not make your translators a member of the translators group, so they will not have any global permissions. But when they are part of the project, the online project, they will automatically get the proper kind of access to the translation memories in that project. So I hope that answers your question. That is why I went into the part where I showed you what kind of extra permissions apply through membership in an online project. And the question from Renato. Translator A is using a license granted by the permission framework. I add him to an online project, leaving the license checkbox selected. How many licenses is he taking out from my server? In case the translator already has a license that is granted to him or her because of a permission, whether that is a project permission or regular permission, then that is the license. MemoQ will not take a second license for the same user. So you don't need to be afraid of giving your users too many ways, too many permissions of getting a license. The end result is always at most one license. It can also be 0, of course, if the translator doesn't actually claim the license. Okay, so this was all the topics that I wanted to cover in this webinar. I don't really see any further questions coming up from you. That means it was either too much to digest in such a short webinar, or maybe it's a lot more trivial than I think permissions are, because I myself tend to get confused from time to time. In any case, this webinar is being recorded, and I am going to upload it and publish it, so that answers the latest question. It will be available in the webinar section of our website. And finally, one question from Martin. Does the ELM mechanism keep logs and make statistics reports about who used mobile licenses for how long, etc., so we could eventually manage mobile license rentals? Of course it keeps logs. It needs to keep logs in order for it to function. We don't have any reports based on those logs at the moment in MemoQ server. So we don't have any reporting functionality associated to licenses. All right. Thank you very much for being here. I hope you will have a nice day or evening. Hope to see you again in some other webinars, or some of you in person quite soon. And bye-bye.